Well, hello everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Tools for Harnessing Collective Creativity. My name is Duncan Field, and I'm a community animator with the Tamarack Institute. Just before we get started, I wanted to go through something. We wanted to begin the workshop by acknowledging that we are meeting on Indigenous lands. And as settlers, we're grateful for the opportunity to meet, and we thank all the generations of Indigenous peoples who have taken care of this land. And as settlers, this recognition of the contributions and historic importance of Indigenous peoples must be clearly and overtly connected for a collective commitment to make the promise and the challenge of truth and reconciliation real in our communities. And I myself am phoning in from Mississauga, Ontario, traditional lands of the Haudenosaunee, Huron-Wendat, and the Mississaugas of the Credit. I encourage everyone in chat to share what land you're joining today's call from as well. So I'm also excited to introduce today's discussion with Sylvia Cheuy. Sylvia is Consulting Director of the Tamarack Institute's Collective Impact Idea Area. She's passionate about community change and what becomes possible when residents and various sector leaders share an aspirational vision for their future. Sylvia believes that when the assets of residents and community are identified and connected, they become powerful drivers of community change. Welcome, Sylvia.
Thanks, Duncan. Good afternoon, everyone. I am thrilled to have you all with us. Seeing someone, welcome Simon from Scotland. So we got people from everywhere, huh?
Wonderful. Yeah, speaking of, we are going to take just a quick look at who's in the room here, or the virtual room rather. We have 150 learners with us today, registered from Canada, the US, Australia, New Zealand, UK, Mexico, Kuwait, Poland, and Thailand, and quite a few different sectors represented here as well, from government, health, nonprofit, post-secondary, foundations, Indigenous organizations, arts, and sustainability. So a pretty diverse group for us here today, Sylvia.
Fantastic.
So I'm going to pass it over to you as we head into today's discussion.
Well, and I want to start, I think, by inviting all of us to join in on a little quick poll. So the theory or the focus of our webinar today is on collective creativity. And so I thought the best place to start would be this poll. If you can take a look at those great photos there in front of you, you all probably have different experiences of what a collective creativity might mean. And I'd invite you to choose the one that speaks to you the most. Best.
And I will say that the poll function, you can actually click and drag it around your screen. I know it probably is blocking numbers 2 and 5. So feel free to move that just to make sure that you can see all the images. But we'll give you guys another 20 seconds or so to fill that out, and we'll see how we're all feeling today. Sylvia, how would you describe your experience with collective creativity?
I think I love it feels a little bit like an oxymoron, this notion of being creative and actually being creative together. I think for me, number one is really speaking to me because it is such a, it can be a team sport, I think. And I'm such an extrovert that I love kind of working together with others. So is that, I'm curious, is that sort of, where are we at? Is that everybody or do we have more to come?
Yeah, I've just closed the poll and am sharing the results now. And it looks like image number 1 did win. I'd say somewhat handily with 45% of the vote. Image 2 was the next closest with 21%. And then it's pretty spread out with the others between 6 and 9%. So it seems like overwhelmingly number 1 has won here, which I guess is good news because it seems fairly positive.
Now, if you had to vote, where would you put yourself?
Ooh, it depends on the day. Sometimes it's number 2, sometimes number 1. I think it depends a lot on the group that you're working with, but also kind of the parameters you set, because I guess there are some behaviors that encourage kind of honest feedback and contributions and some that don't. And when it's a good group and good parameters, you get number 1. Otherwise, I feel like you can get number 2. But yeah, it's encouraging to see that people are approaching this from that positive mindset.
Beautiful. Thanks, Duncan. I think this looks good. Well, let's dive in then. And I want to start by really taking a moment to explore what do we mean when we're talking about this thing called collective creativity. For me, it's really a source of tremendous innovation, fuel for innovation. And I think one of the big challenges for us as change makers is how do we harness that fuel and direct it in really constructive ways. And that's what I want to spend a little bit of time talking about and sort of laying a foundation for before we dive a little further into the content. Now let's see, there we go. For me, one of the things that we're hearing and seeing a lot of in this unusual post-pandemic sort of world that we're living in is this time of tremendous disruption. So lots of stuff that we thought was a given being thrown up into the air, and lots of influences that we have to deal with that we may not feel particularly in control of, and yet this sense of needing to grab some control of something somewhere, feeling a bit overwhelmed as we try to navigate fresh territory where our old maps and tools may not be helping us get to where we want to go. And so the need for innovation and creativity now, I would argue, is more important than ever. Our colleague Mark Kabosh from Here to There Consulting gave us this beautiful visual, which I really, really like, in terms of giving us some context, right? In terms of navigating in this world in particular. So we have been humming along with things in a relatively predictable way, and suddenly there has been this huge disruption, the pandemic most recently, and that creates all kinds of upheaval, and now we're standing in a place of uncertainty. Do we go back to the old status quo normal of what we once had? Is this an opportunity, and to what extent can we use this as an opportunity to create a new normal that we're returning back to? And or as we work hard to create a new normal, are we going to have to navigate a lot more disruptions over time? These are all unknowns. But being able to see these as options, I think, and have conversations together with others that we are wanting to work and lead with can be a really helpful way to kind of ground the conversation and the exploration. Ultimately, I think at the core, the reasons why creativity and innovation become so important is that if we're wanting to chart a new path, if we're wanting to create a new normal, then it is a given that we can't solve the same problem, the problems that we are now facing with the same level of thinking that created them in the first place, as Einstein has said. And so the objective from my point of view is, are there ways in which we can generate more options for how we see the situation we find ourselves in? Because if we can do that, then that will expand the choices that we see as being available to us in terms of how we might choose to move forward. Okay, so one of the things I love, and let's really ground in, what do we mean when we're talking about community innovation? Well, we at Tamarack really see community innovation as a very specific form of social innovation that is rooted in place. And one of the key distinguishing characteristics of innovation relative to, say, continuous improvement would be that innovation contains within it something that's more ambitious and more uncertain than what we would normally see in a more of an effort around continuous improvement. And really often, the best innovations in community often are the result of sort of braiding together existing elements or activities in the community that have always been there, but we're combining them in new ways across different boundaries, perhaps. And I'm always grounded, as I think about community innovation, in the insight that Alan Mansky shared in the quote on the left-hand side there, that human ingenuity and creativity in the face of adversity is not a unique superpower to a small number, but it's actually something that is core to our DNA as humans. So really helpful to kind of ground in that. So to have community innovation thrive, I think there are three core things you really need to pay attention to. The first is a real appreciation of your issue, and it may be that your new choices are generated from a richer, more diverse exploration of what you believe your issue to be. Second is a real grounding in the uniqueness of the place where you are hoping to root your innovation. Who are the leaders? Who are the folks that get things done? Where are the stumbling blocks in the narratives of our community that get in the way? These things and knowing that are really, really important. And then finally, there is this innovation mindset that you need to be committed to in terms of attitudes and behaviors that you and others around you are intentionally committing to stand in curiosity and creativity and asking ourselves what if and what else, not only focusing on what's wrong. Okay, so 3 building blocks that I think really help to create that innovation mindset that we've been talking about. The first is you need a collection of tools and techniques, and that's what I want to spend the balance of this webinar exploring with you, some of my favorites from my toolkit. The second is you need to kind of develop your own skill and capacity around using and applying and adapting these tools, because I think your skill and confidence grows the more you give yourself reasons to kind of experiment. And so I hope that after today you feel compelled to kind of dig in and experiment and add new skills and tools to your own toolkit. And then lastly is this mindset, right? This mindset of attitudes and behaviors that you're inviting others to join with you in exploring how might we, and really kind of freeing up some space to be creative together. So for me, one of my favorite toolkits, and many of you may already be familiar with the toolkit that comes from Liberating Structures. So Liberating Structures are 33 tools that have been compiled that really are designed to enable people to think and learn differently together. And what makes these 33 facilitation sort of tools particularly valuable is the way that they, in safe and contained ways, shift people out of their traditional ways of thinking and doing, and in that they are disrupting the status quo and inviting new possibilities. They really are designed in ways that allow folks to think together, to see things differently, and begin to innovate. And each tool offers to the participants a minimum amount of structure for how they engage with one another and with the ideas. And all 3 liberate the conversation and promote new ways of collective seeing and thinking. So one of the things I love was this graphic that began to distinguish why and how these 33 facilitation little tools in the Liberating Structures toolkit really encourage that kind of collectively thinking and acting differently. So if you think about yourself and sort of the work that you've been involved in, typically there are 4 or 5 traditional ways that we run meetings when we all get together. So presentations is one, managed discussions. So, there's all a topic for discussion and it's very structured. Status reports, which is really about just kind of outloading information to others. Sometimes we have open discussions and sometimes we have brainstorms. The challenge with all of those approaches is that some are either quite constraining, certainly in the case of presentations or managed discussions or status reports, because there's nothing to react to, right? Or they can be too loose, like an open discussion or a brainstorm without parameters around how the results of that engagement are going to go anywhere can be really, really, really frustrating. So the 33 Liberating Structures tools really are designed and have thought through how do we encourage and include distributed control across a broader network of people and engage them meaningfully in helping to shape the ideas moving forward in ways that are inclusive and participatory and visual and transparent, and often, I find, quite fun. So let's dig in. I'll tell you, these are the principles that underpin each one of the 33 tools, and I really like that you'll see it's really about how to include and unleash everyone. You know, they're rooted in a belief and in the importance of the wisdom of the varying perspectives, and really encourage, by creating a safe container, people to dive in and think together. You'll see there is a book and a website, which I saw Duncan just posted in the chat if you want to go check it out. But each one of the 33 tools, if you're new as a facilitator, they're beautifully written because you get a clear invitation, you get a very clear set of directions about how to optimally sort of set up the experience for people. You're clear around how people get a chance to interact with one another and how that's structured, how the group is configured, and then the steps and sequence that you would follow to implement it. So really, really, really simple and easy. And one of the things that is always helpful is to be intentional about when does it make sense to be using certain tools over others. And I find I turn to the Liberating Structures Toolkit when I know I'm going to be working with people from across a system who may have very unequal or differing levels of information and power. I'm working with people maybe who come from different sectors and perspectives and therefore bring different assumptions about what exists and what's needed. These are really helpful tools when the formal links between the people in the room are not well defined, and or there's huge gaps in knowledge between what's happening on the ground at the local level and higher up throughout an organization or system, and needing to kind of cross and link and align those perspectives. Yeah, and when there's some time pressure and it feels like nobody's trusting, having a tool or a process to guide you might be something that people are open and interested in diving into. So you'll see here, and you'll see on the website as well, there's the menu of the 33 tools. So I would say if you're wanting to try these out, the first thing you can do is become really familiar with the menu. The second thing is, you give yourself an opportunity to walk before you run. So buddy up with someone that you trust who might give you some support in facilitating something together, or try it out in a safe group before you sort of take it to a different group where you're less known or feel less confident. And be really transparent that you're trying this out, this is new for you, and you would welcome and encourage people to give you feedback around how it's going. And what you'll see on the website, one of the things that you can access, and I think this is a beautiful way to actually help you become more familiar with using these tools and the menu as a whole, is this PDF called the Matchmaker, and the link is there at the bottom of the screen. So you'll see on the left-hand side, there's a bunch of questions. So, what are you trying to do? I am trying to rapidly share challenges and expectations while building new connections. Okay, if that's what you're trying to do, then impromptu networking that takes between 5 and 20 minutes is probably a tool you'll want to look at, right? So for each one of the 33 tools, what you see here is a very clear sort of set of prompts that asks you to really ground in what is it that needs to happen when you bring this group of people together, and that helps you better kind of wade through and select which of the tools might be the right one for you to be giving a go to right now. So, are you ready? Because I would love to give you a moment to try out one of the tools in the Liberating Structures Toolkit. I don't have the capacity on this call to break you into small groups, so what I'm going to ask is that each one of us, we actually try this out, and just sort of reflecting on your own. Maybe all you'll need is a piece of paper if you have one handy where you can jot some things down. The tool that I'm going to introduce you to is called TRIZ, which stands for a very long Russian name, which you can see underneath, which I'm not even going to try and pronounce, but it really roughly translates into the theory for solving ingenious problems. Okay, so this is a tool that you would use if you want to try and help get folks to identify and stop counterproductive activities and behaviors. There are two places or times where I find this particularly a useful tool. The first is, when you're trying to kind of get people to think about implementing a new approach or trying something new, and the first pushback you will often get is, but I'm already so overwhelmed, but I'm already doing so much. How can you be asking me to do more? And this is a really fun way to invite them to reflect and think about things that maybe they can give themselves permission to stop doing, but to do it in a really playful way. And then the other place where I find this particularly helpful in the context of thinking about systems change is knowing that often we are part of the system, and so some of the activities and practices that we do within our own organizations are contributing to the problem. Inviting people to first look internal to their own organization, say, what are we doing right now that is counterproductive, and maybe have a conversation about what we can stop. Okay? I think what I love as well is it's great fun, and somehow when there's humor and absurdness at play, it becomes a safer place to bring out some of the sacred cows or the taboo topics that everyone wants to talk about, but it's hard to bring forward. So let's give this a go, shall we? Okay. First, I want you to imagine that what would you do to ensure that the work of your organization or your project used huge amounts of resources, delivered minimal results, and left everyone never wanting to participate again. So absolutely the worst possible experience. If you were going to design a program that produced minimal results, left everyone feeling miserable, and ate lots of resources while you did it, I want you to brainstorm now, jot down at least 5 ideas for what are some of the things that you would absolutely do to design for this and making this possible. Okay, just another minute or two. Got your list? At least 5 things. All right, now here comes the moment of truth. What I want you to do is think about a project that you're currently working on, and I want you to review the list of ideas that you came up with and circle any of the things on your list that resembles, even in the smallest way, a current behavior or practice for how you are working right now. Hopefully you've circled at least one thing, or maybe it led you to generate one more idea. I'm not sure. Gloria, I would say whatever works for you. She's asking, should I be thinking about people in the group or me as an individual? I would say think about whichever works best for you. If you're thinking about a group, that would be absolutely fine. And now, underneath that list, I would invite you to make note to yourself of things you're going to give yourself permission to stop doing. and really think about, if I'm going to be committed to stopping this unhelpful practice, is there support or help I might need from anyone else in my organization? You know, I often think of a colleague who worked for some time in homeless services, services for homeless folks. And one of the things that he commented on was, in their organization, the diligent staff, for their own tracking purposes and reporting and whatever, would make folks that were coming in to take advantage of sort of the winter clothing donation that they received, made everybody sign in and give their name and their contact information and whatever before they were able to go in and get the winter clothing that they needed. And he was watching this, and he was watching this big long line form, you know, in the lobby and out the door, and he turned to the staff folks and he said, "So folks, got to ask you, is there any reason why we would say to someone coming honestly looking for and asking for winter clothing, would we ever say no? No, we wouldn't." And so then his question was, so then why are we doing it, right? Why are we doing this? It's actually become a habit. It's become part of our culture, but we actually don't think a lot about why we do what we do, or we don't typically have intentional moments or processes when we can stop, right? And give ourselves permission and or let alone have conversations with colleagues about, are there things that we can agree to stop doing? So I would invite you, I'm really curious to see in the chat box there, what did you notice as you worked yourself through this experience of TRIZ? And also curious if anyone wants to type into the chat box as well, where there are situations that you're currently doing some work in that you find that this might be a really useful and helpful exercise to do. So go on and give us some thoughts and ideas about that. Okay. Mr. Chad, yep, I'm seeing people starting to chime in right now. This is great. Strategic planning meetings, yeah. Oh, Charlotte, I love your image of you have to weed first before you plant the flowers. That's very much what this is like. Absolutely, I love that metaphor. Holly, this is lovely. So Holly's sharing how you've used this internally to highlight some of the challenges that you're experiencing with staff engagement. Yep. You know, that's the thing. We're all human, right? And we fall into patterns and we don't always realize what they are. Very insightful, Isabel. Saying that, you know, examining the worst, you then realize there are always small steps for how you could improve things. Yeah, Gloria, your thought about using this as team building during COVID, I think is a really interesting one, because I have been thinking a lot myself about, as we start turning our minds to reopening and recovery, how do we ensure that equity and justice is sort of baked into how we think about what we keep and what we don't keep as we return. Beautiful. I see, Lisa, you're asking a really great question. You know, as an individual just starting out, not having a lot of thought partners, needing to move away from being one-person show and not sure how to use this to engage others. You're right, it may not be the right tool for what you are seeking to achieve, and that's why I think, and I love the 33 tools, and really the importance of taking time to sort of pause and think about which of these might help me. But the one piece that I really love about this in general is that you can use any one of these tools to go out. I have a colleague who wrote a blog on our website. I think it's something about hosting 100 cups of coffee. And I think as someone new or someone working alone in your context, being able to use some of these tools to focus your inquiry and invite 100 different people from across, your sector or your idea area out for coffee in a really structured way might be a beautiful way to start building that thought partner network for yourself. So just a thought. I do want to move us now towards leaving time for people's comments and questions, but to kind of ground us a little bit in terms of moving this forward, I just want to do a bit of a recap in terms of TRIZ itself. So step one, right, first alone and then maybe in a small group. If you were doing this, you could imagine in our Zoom world doing this first, asking people to take 2 minutes to jot down their ideas alone and then break them into small breakout groups to compile their list. And I think the interaction might be really helpful because it does create lots of humor, I think. And then in that small breakout room, as a second task, ask them to identify the things that resemble in any way, shape, or form the ideas on the list, and then invite them to have a conversation in small group and report back to the whole in terms of things that they identified that could they could stop. I know for us and the purposes of today, one of the challenges has been, you're all coming from different places, and we don't necessarily as a group have a common project, or we're not all part of the same organization and or same collaborative effort. And so this may not be a great tool for folks that, are just coming together and starting to know one another. And so just a restatement of how important it is to really think through. Not every tool is going to work in every context. And so is this the right or the best tool for us and what we're trying to achieve right now? But I thought it would be a fun and easy one to give you all a taste of kind of how these tools are set up and structured to work. So yeah, before we go to questions, there are a couple other things that I was hoping were here. Oh, they're not, but I will say it then. In addition to the website that Duncan has put into the chat room, there's also a Liberating Structures app that you're able to download both from the Apple Store and also from Android. And what it does is it gives you the 33 tools right in your hand on your phone and gives you an outline of how and when to use each one. So there you go. Are we starting to get any comments or questions in our chat box here? Duncan, what are we hearing from folks?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm just going to put a link to the app description page from Liberating Structures in the chat as well. Of course, you'll have to go to the App Store on either platform to actually get the app, but this will give you a nice overview. Again, if anyone has any questions for Sylvia, feel free to enter them into the Q&A panel, and you'll find that at the bottom of your Zoom client. And if you don't have a question, you can also go to the Q&A panel and use the thumbs up feature to vote on which questions you'd like answered. The first question actually came from chat, and it was from Robin, and they asked, does this change in COVID? Are there any adaptations we need to make in using liberating structures in a virtual environment?
And I would say absolutely. There are. I think not every platform allows us to do the small group piece. if I were going to do this on Zoom, depending on the tool, I would also really take advantage of the Zoom whiteboard function, or sometimes at Tamarack we've been playing with a tool called Mural. There's also Google Jamboards and Google Docs, so that we can flip between giving people the task and then changing the screen, so that even if we are not all physically in the same room, we can at least capture and show in the moment, right, the co-construction of our collective thinking, and capture that on a whiteboard that we can all see. So that would be a really important adaptation. So I would be looking for, when might I take advantage of breakout rooms in Zoom, for example? How might I use the Zoom whiteboard function or another tool like Mural or Jamboard to augment the experience for people, so that when we start to bring our ideas and thinking back, we're doing it in a way that makes it visible to everyone. Does that help?
Yeah, I think that's a great start, and I love what you mentioned about Mural and Google Jamboards. That's something that you and I have used together in a few ways, and we've been using Mural quite a bit at Tamarack in our new virtual workshops, because as soon as COVID hit, the idea of doing a workshop without some sort of table collaboration or virtual table collaboration makes things so much harder, especially when you get to activities like these, where you're really trying to peel back layers of insight and wisdom. So I think those will be really handy. And I put a link to Mural in the chat. There is a free version if anyone wants to just use it to try it out. I know there have been some comments about using these techniques in smaller groups, so that would probably be ideal for the free versions there. So I think that's a great suggestion.
I see that Charlotte asked in the chat box a question about favorite tools. One of my favorites that feels really timely right now is called Critical Uncertainties, the Critical Uncertainties tool. And what I really like about that one is it's a good way for us to generate possible scenarios, right? Up to 4 possible scenarios for how we would navigate uncertainty. And it encourages us to sort of put those on a matrix and then describe what each one of the quadrants might look and feel like, and and then the question is, how would you adapt? How would we respond in this environment? What are the strategies that we would take advantage of? And you could methodically, as a group, work through all 4, or you could break out and have each, have one of 4 groups kind of each develop a quadrant and bring it back. But the key is that when you look at the strategies for how you would respond in these different possible futures, you start to see that there are some strategies that are consistent and that you would lean into regardless of what was happening. And that really is a good litmus test that these are robust strategies that you're going to stick to no matter what. And then there may be other strategies that are unique to one scenario or another, but they may be important enough to your future that you would sort of build out a contingency about how you would do something like that. Okay, other questions, Duncan, that we're getting?
Yeah, Maria just had a question regarding if Liberating Structures were available in French, and I did some Googling, and it looks like there is a French website. Just from a 1,000-foot view, I wasn't sure if it was actually from Liberating Structures or if someone had cloned it and translated it themselves. I've shared that link in chat. I'll be sure to include that in the post-webinar email as well, so that everyone has access to that. But you can definitely take a look in the chat.
I also know that I think that the Liberating Structures, there is a movement of folks that that have been sponsored and come together globally. So Liberating Structures are used around the world, and I know that there's some Spanish resources as well online, and other languages also. The other thing I would encourage you to check out if you're there on the website is that there's a tab on the website, and one of the features is in development. So there's a fair degree of rigor that's been brought to each of the 33 tools that are part of the current Liberating Structures menu. They've been thought through, they've been tried out in a number of scenarios, and the folks who are the champions of Liberating Structures know that those are robust. The ones that are in the in development list are ideas, facilitating ideas that people have been playing with that haven't fully been road tested but are still fairly robust. So the menu is growing, and if you want to see some of what's emerging as newer tools beyond the 33, those are there as well.
Wonderful. Thank you, Sylvia. Our next question comes from Simon, and they ask, have you used these in evaluation? I'm thinking they'd be useful in participatory evaluations where we're looking to get people's thoughts on the process, what's changed, what worked, etc.
That's a great question, Simon. So personally, no, I have not used these, but I agree. I think so many of them are helpful in helping people surface and share what's important to them and making it visible. I think that's always the key. The beauty of all of these tools is that they offer simple and clean and easy ways for people to reflect and then also share out their insights in ways that make it visible. And as a facilitator, for me, one of the things that I value about the tools is if you bring a tool forward and you're working through that tool, it actually enables you to make the issue objective. So if there's tension on a team, it's you versus me, your way of thinking versus my way of thinking, which often shows up in the work that we do, and you're bringing diverse perspectives and sectors together who don't have a history of working alongside one another. We can all kind of, the tool itself creates a bit of neutrality, and the sharing out of the insights generated from the tool, if done well and held by a facilitator, can also reveal without blame some of the dynamics that we are all contributing to. Great. Anyone else? Comments, thoughts, ideas, questions?
It looks like Cheuy has just mentioned that there is a Slack community as well for Liberating Structures. I'll dig up the link for that and include it either in chat or if I don't find it in time in the post-webinar email as well. So thank you, Cheuy, for that. Our next question comes from Bohanna, and they ask, can these tools be used in smaller settings as well? For example, a team meeting or a small project?
Absolutely. Absolutely they can. Some of these work really, really well as well. I've used them even as an individual. So I have sometimes taken a tool and thought, that's really interesting. So if I'm struggling to get clear about how I would articulate something, sometimes kind of giving myself the structure of the tool can be really helpful in unpacking my thinking in ways that then make it easier to share. So absolutely, you do have to sort of think about sort of size of group, and you may have to adapt a tool. Like if we had a group of 100 people, could we get people to do it first individually and then do it and have a dialogue about it in a shared small group? And then how would we harvest the insights from the various small groups and make them visible in a room of 100 people? That's one way to do it. But yeah, absolutely. And I would say as a facilitator, if you're designing a session and you're wanting to look at and think about and play with the tools, one of the best things you can do is individually imagine yourself going through that exercise and seeing how it would feel and seeing whether it would work or whether there's something else that you might, another tool that might be better suited for what you are trying to accomplish. I think the assumption that's critical in all of these tools is to take some time to get really clear and focused about what is essential, what is the conversation, what is the question that you want the group to explore together, and then how would this tool create an opportunity for them to more safely explore it, and sort of step back from it a bit. Yeah.
That's great. I know I was very excited when I first learned about Liberating Structures. I think, Sylvia, you were the one to introduce me to it. And that's one of the great benefits of working at Tamarack is that there are so many of these interesting approaches to facilitation. That leads to our next question from Simon. Are there other ready-made Liberating Structure type toolboxes for facilitating in a similar way that we could look at in addition to these?
Oh, Simon, great question. So for me, another place that I have gone to personally for looking for facilitation tools, and these are more sort of tapped into thinking about innovation and thinking differently, is the Gamestorming Toolkit, and I think it's www.gamestorming.com. And then recently, there's two others that are more toolkits that I go to and look at more with a community change lens, so less around the innovation, sort of thinking differently facilitation slant, and more toolkits that I would go to when I'm thinking about engaging community and the diversity of community members. One comes out of the UK and the UK's Big Local initiative, and it's an amalgam of 6 or 7 different national entities that have created a community toolbox. And I'm happy to share that one as a link in the follow-up materials that we share, because the name of it has just escaped me and it's relatively new. And to be honest, I've just gone in and sort of toured around quickly. I haven't dug deep into the tools themselves, but those are really rooted in community engagement and grassroots community leadership. And then there's a second one, which is a community toolbox from the University of Kansas, and that one I tend to go to looking for structures and tools around working collaboratively on complex issues. So kind of different assemblies of toolkits that you learn to sort of find along the way. And I'm sure, like, if others of you have other sources of tools that you would like to post in the chat box as well, that are your go-tos, then we can make sure that in the summary that we send with this webinar, we will include your toolkits as well. Any other comments or questions from folks?
Looks like we have time for 1 or 2 more. The first comes from Cynthia. They ask, what could be some recommendations if you want to send an activity in advance to complete solo before meeting as a group later?
Well, I think that's a great question, and I would flip it around a little bit to you and say, well, it depends. It depends on why you're wanting folks to gather. If folks are meeting for the first time, you may want to get them to think about talking about who are you and why does this issue matter to you, or what's one thing about our collective work that really that you're hoping to contribute to this collective work, something like that. But again, the exercise for me is really dependent on where is the group at and what is the group coming together for. What are you trying to achieve? So whatever you decide you might want to do as sort of homework in advance needs to fit with that broader sort of strategy and what you're trying to accomplish. So for example, if, as another example, I was trying to bring different players together from across the community to look at how we might address a particular issue differently, what I might do is do a survey of us individually in terms of what is your organization, where do you provide service, what are your service boundaries, who do you serve, like what age groups, what days of the week, whatever. And do you do policy work? Do you just do service delivery work? So like a bit of an inventory about who are you. And if you gave yourself enough lead time, then you could aggregate that data and show the community in the room back. Who are we as a collective? Because we don't often know that when we come together to do collaborative work. So again, that would be another much more sort of robust exercise and survey piece of work that you might want to do, depending on the reason why you're bringing folks together and how long you envision them kind of working alongside one another on this issue.
Well, thanks, Sylvia. I think we have time for one more quick question. This comes from an anonymous attendee. And they ask, they were just checking the app. Could you help with an example to understand what the difference is between strings and structures?
So I think in the language of liberating structures, there are the 33 structures. And when they talk about strings, I think what they are talking about is, in the design of a 2-hour meeting or a 4-hour meeting or whatever, you might string together 3 or 4 of these tools in this sequence. So I think it's their lingo. So if each of the 33 liberating structures is an exercise or an activity, then a string is what is the sequence of activities that you would put together to plan an entire half-day session, for example. Make sense?
Wonderful. Well, thank you everyone for submitting your questions and comments. We're going to try our best to collect all those comments and links and ideas and share them back to you in our post-webinar email. I also want to thank you, Sylvia, for bringing us through this webinar and sharing your wisdom with us. I know when I first learned about liberating structures and this concept of these toolkits, it was very exciting because I had very little experience facilitating in this way. So I hope this has been as helpful for others as it was for me. Just before we get going, I do have a couple quick announcements of some learning opportunities that are coming up at the Tamarack Institute. The first is that we're continuing to do a weekly webinar series through the fall. So you can join us for free webinars like this one on a variety of topics such as engagement, evaluation, youth, poverty reduction, and much more. You can find more information about that at tamarackcommunity.ca. And we're also still excited about our launch of Foundations of Community Engagement. This is a brand new offering for us. It's a self-directed online course that looks to provide you with the foundational tools you'll need to complete a community engagement activity. You'll learn alongside Lisa Attakla, our Director of Community Engagement at Tamarack Institute, and she'll bring you through several different phases of what a community engagement activity will look like. And you can find more information about that at tamarackcommunity.ca as well. So in the next few days, we'll send you an email with the full recording of today's call, a collection of links and resources, as well as links to the opportunities I just mentioned. Thank you everyone for being here today, and I hope everyone has a wonderful week.
Thanks so much, Duncan, for hosting us through this so well.
All right, thanks everyone.
Bye everyone, have a great afternoon.